one of the things that you need to note in your Bible, like as we're going through this, I want you to connect together Daniel 11, verse 2, all the way to Daniel 12 and verse 4. One of the great disadvantages of having paragraph breaks or chapter breaks in the Bible is that sometimes they're put in the wrong places. The chapter divisions and the verse divisions of your Bibles, those are not inspired. They came later. The Word of God is inspired. And so in order for us to read through this and I think properly understand the flow of this text, just skip right past 12. Forget that chapter title's even there. So we're going to go 11:2 through 12:4 tonight. As you're scanning the outline that I gave you guys, probably what you're noticing, well, let's kind of talk about it for a bit in broad detail, and I'm going to use it to introduce us tonight to Daniel 11. You have several things. You have 4 different columns. Left-hand column, you have Daniel 11. And then below that, you have specific verses in Daniel 11. Then you're going to see the next 2 columns to the right. One, parentheses, Egypt. This is the Ptolemaic dynasty. In Daniel 11, the kings coming from this dynasty, or the leaders coming from this dynasty, will be known as the kings of the south. So you'll see that phrase, king of the south. And then what you'll notice after that is the exploits of a particular Ptolemaic king and what he does. Next column to the right. This would be geographically Syria. The ancient dynasty coming out of that area is the Seleucid dynasty. In Daniel 11, it's going to label kings coming from this dynasty as the kings of the north. And then you have dates, far right column. So what you can see really quickly as we're going through this, just broadly looking at it, Daniel 11 is highly precise. Although it doesn't give you these names, most scholars, when they look at Daniel 11 and they look at the history of this time period, the 3rd century BC moving into the 2nd century BC, when they overlay the events of that time period on Daniel 11, you can precisely see who Daniel is talking about, down to the very king. So it's a lot of fun. However, let me say one more thing. Liberal scholars have said, this is just too good. There's just too much detail here. There's so much detail that they'll say this. There is no way that this was written about in Daniel's time period in the 6th century BC. What are they saying? There's no such thing as predictive prophecy. These are liberal scholars. They're known as critical scholars. If you read through Old Testament works a lot, you'll probably come across the phrase critical scholarship. Critical scholars, for them, Daniel is far too precise to be prophecy. So what they will do with it is they will say this. What this actually is called prediction after the fact. So you let an event happen, and then you write about something that has already happened as if it hasn't happened yet, so that it looks like you're predicting the future exhaustively. Well, that's a big hoop to jump through just to demonstrate your basic presupposition. What's your basic presupposition? You don't believe God's all-knowing. You don't believe that he exhaustively knows the future. So you're willing to deny something in God, and that is his exhaustive foreknowledge, predictive prophecy, in order to uphold a presupposition in yourself. Daniel is, in their view, written much, much later in time, written after the fact. There are others kind of on this general point. There are others who also have a problem with predictive prophecy or God's knowledge of the future. And they'll say things like this. They use kind of a slippery slope argument. They'll say, God can know only the things that God will do, but not the things that you will do, man will do. So George has heard of this. This is known as middle knowledge. Molinism is the technical name for it. Is there a problem with that view? Absolutely there's a problem with that view. God, as God, must have sweeping knowledge over all things, in all ways, or else he's not really God. Now, why did the Molinists take that position? Well, the Molinists took that position because they really wanted to uphold something in man as well. So they're a lot like our critical or liberal scholar friends. What they wanted to uphold was human autonomy. And they said, for man to really be autonomous, to be, quote, free, then he cannot be influenced from the outside in any way. And then he's making, if he's not influenced from the outside in any way, then he's making free decisions. Now, what's the problem with that? There's a lot of problems with it, but just basic logic. George is on it. There's never a second that you're not influenced from the outside. I always tell, pick on men at this time. How did you date your wife? Did you just walk up to her one day and say, whatever her name is? For me, Macy. Macy, I think I'd like to go out with you. And this is going to go to marriage, I'm thinking. All you got to do is say yes right now. I mean, that's all. Just say yes, and we'll just set the wedding date and move on. Is that the way that it worked? No. You do that to your wife, she would say, well, first of all, she's not your wife yet, so she would call you crazy. You're a nut. If I wanted to find guys like this, I could go to the psychiatric ward and they'd be lined up. No, get away from me. In other words, it doesn't work in the real world. But often, that's what we do. We want to deny things in God in order to elevate things in man. So there's a danger in that. Don't do that. Again, broadly looking at this whole outline, what we find out is that God is the true sovereign over human history, not a human king. In several places in this chapter, we're going to see passive verbs. We might call those divine passives, where a king is raised up and a king is taken out. And it looks like from world politics that, other players are involved, other nations are involved. Step back a bit. Who is that passive verb really intended to describe as the actor of that action? It is God, not man. Okay, so I think that's a fair introduction to Daniel 11. Let's go to our next slide, slide 3. This is the big picture of it. God's sovereign will guides human history. What does that mean to you? If God can control very minute details, and we're going to talk about some kind of salacious soap opera drama that we can see behind the scenes here in Daniel 11 that you'll probably laugh at. But if God can control all of these things, then what does that mean about his sovereign care of your life? You think you can take care of the things we prayed for tonight? Sicknesses, travel? Yeah, absolutely. Our God is in control of all things in all ways for his glory, which results in our good. Let's begin reading now. Why don't we break the chapter Daniel 11 up like this? We're going to do it in 2 parts. First part, this is slide 4. God's sovereign view of the past. So this is verses 2 through verse 35. Let's read, and when I get to a fun verse, i.e. Around verse 4 through 6, I'm going to pause for a bit and show you a couple of funny details. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity. Let's just pause for a bit. His kingdom will be broken, passive. Why? Well, first of all, let's ask one more question. Who is being spoken about in verse 4, verse 3 and 4? You can look at your outline. Alexander the Great, that's right. His kingdom is divided to the four winds, or we could say it differently, to the four diadokoi, his generals. And then out of that conflict, out of those four, the conflict will draw to a head with two empires fighting it out. And that's what your outline's showing you. The Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. All right, notice one more thing. As soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, so diadokoi, but not to his posterity. Did Alexander the Great have sons? The answer is, yes, he did. What happened to those boys? They were assassinated. What does every father want? Let's go one more level. What does every father who's a king want to see happen? That's right, successors. Poor Alexander. He has no successors to take over his kingdom, and so it's divided out to four generals. Keep reading. But not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Isn't that incredible? He did not. He dies in 323 of fever or some other ailment. Not exactly sure what got him. Historians describe it in a feverish manner. Okay, 5. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Verse 6. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up in her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Okay, let's pause for a bit. Confession time. Have you ever watched a soap opera? Raise your hand if you're guilty. Tell you a story. When I was in college, my brother and I rented a small house on the edge of town. This was in the Ozark kind of mountains. Wouldn't really call them mountains, hills. We rented that house for two reasons. One, it was as close to out of town as you could get and still be in town, which meant it was as close to the fly fishing spot as we could get, but still be in town. So proximity, great house. The other reason why we rented it is it was dirt cheap. When you're a college student, you don't have a lot of money. You certainly don't have money for things like cable television. But we got the local channel. And so we'd come home for lunch, and we would eat lunch. We always had our fly fishing stuff in the car. The game was go to class at 7, load up classes 7 to noon. Fish don't really start biting until, noonish anyway. And then after we get done fishing, or after we get done with class, eat a real quick lunch, and watch a soap opera on mute during that time, during that lunch, and then we'd hop in the car and go fly fishing. So we put our soap opera on mute, and we would make up a whole storyline for it, based on the way that the characters looked. We would kind of fill in the details, and we laughed. We thought it was great. It was probably better than the script that the writers wrote. Soap opera detail here in verse 6. Who's this talking about? Well, it is talking about some romantic diplomacy. In 250 BC, Ptolemy II, you can see him. This is on 11:6 on your outline. Bernice, daughter of Ptolemy II, married Antiochus. Ptolemy II gives his daughter Bernice to Antiochus II, Theos. You can see him on the right column under the Syrian kings. So we're going through some diplomacy here. Historically, if you're a monarch, there's a lot of ways to maintain stability in your kingdom. One is with a really strong army. The other one is, if you have an enemy, just marry the daughter of the enemy And then that king's not going to want to attack you because it's family, right? You're not going to attack family. So that's what happens. He gives his daughter Bernice away in marriage, but there's a problem. The problem is Antiochus II is already married. Soap opera time here. He's married to a woman by the name of Laodice, Laodice. Well, Antiochus sees this potential as, it's good for politics, so I'll send my wife away. He doesn't divorce her. He keeps her around. He just sends her away. He brings Bernice in, fathers a son with Bernice, but then Bernice's dad dies. What happens as soon as Bernice's dad dies? Well, then he brings his first wife back in the picture, and she doesn't like Bernice very much. So she ends up, she doesn't like Bernice. She also doesn't like Antiochus. Why? You sent me away just for politics? Where's love? So what she does is she poisons her husband. Again, great soap opera storyline here. She poisons her husband, and then she makes sure that both Bernice and the son that her husband sired with Bernice are extinguished, liquidated. And all of that is alluded to in verse 6. Read it again. After some years they shall make an alliance. There it is. And the daughter of the king of the south, in other words, the Ptolemaic daughter, shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Pretty incredible, isn't it? Daniel is talking about not just big picture issues, this king came and that one went. He's also talking about details of romantic interest and intrigue and espionage, all right here. Think about what that indicates about the knowledge of God. Let's keep reading. Verse 7, and from a branch, from her roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come, so who's the one that arises in his place? Well, Seleucus II, Callinicus. This is the daughter of Laodice and Antiochus. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but he shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. And he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall arise again, or shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. And after some years, he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. Verse 14, in those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come up and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But when he comes against him, shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land. Let's pause for a little bit. In the glorious land. This is another way of speaking about Israel. So the conflict between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids will pour over into Israel. 17, he shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom. He shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom. But it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. So if you take a look at what's happening, Daniel has now described like roughly 300 years of history from verse 2 to verse 19. As we get into verse, 21, we're going to get into the reign of Antiochus. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So let's kind of race to that point, and we'll do some more reading after that. See if there's anything on your outlines that I want to bring up real quick. Yeah, okay, verses 2 through 20. This is outline or slide 6. Verses 2 through 20 describe these dates, 322 to 175 BC. Again, note the passive voice that occurs throughout. God is the one who's raising up kings and tearing them down. You know what Jesus said to his followers, didn't you? He tells them, basically, fear God and fear no one and nothing else. Fear him who can kill both soul and body in hell. It's tempting when you look at human kings and rulers to want to be afraid of them or to think that they have a power that might be a lasting power. But the truth is, they don't. Daniel is showing this. All right, beginning in verse 20, we'll read 20. 20 is kind of a bridge. We'll get into verse 21, and we'll go to verse 35 and read about Antiochus. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall be strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their heart shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the appointed time. They will speak lies at the same table. What do politicians do when they sit down together? Yeah, they both lie at the same table. Whether it's politicians from two different parties in the same country or from two different countries. 28, and he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. Let's pause on that for just a little bit. Daniel 11, 21 through 35 covers 150 years of history. It's describing Antiochus' coming into power. He is a very cunning and crafty man. Verses 29 through 30, let's read those now, and we'll kind of comment on some of the things that happened under Antiochus' reign. At the appointed time, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be his time as it was before. The south, what is he talking about? Egypt. In other words, Antiochus is going to go down to Egypt, and he's going to try to wage war in Egypt. Verse 30. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. Let's pause there for a bit. Ships of Kittim. Anyone know what Kittim stands for? Rome. What it's describing is something that happened with Antiochus when he went down to Egypt. He's, kind of mustering his troops, things like that, getting into battle mode. And everything's going great for him, except for the fact that all of this has caught the eye of Rome. And so a Roman delegate, and I've got to get his name here. I have like 4 sets of notes, so bear with me for a bit. Find this exact name. Do you have it in a footnote there? Okay. And this is what he does. This is in the historian Polybius records this history. He walks up to Antiochus, and he basically says, I'm from Rome, and you're going to do what we tell you to do. He takes a stick, he draws around Antiochus a circle in the sand, and he says, you've got a decision to make before you step 1 foot out of that circle. The decision is this: you can go back to your own land and live, or you can die here in Egypt. Your choice. Now think about it. This guy is a very arrogant man, Antiochus. He's been able at this point to be able to do whatever he wants, and all of a sudden a stronger force has come in and told him, yeah, you can't do as you will anymore. You're going to do as we will. And if you don't do that, you're done. So Antiochus goes home, goes back to Syria, Palestine, and he's pouting. And as he comes home, this is that event in the history of the Jews where they believed that he had died in Egypt in battle. So the Jews are rejoicing in the streets. It's the greatest day of our lives. This evil, ungodly, horrible ruler is dead, and let's rejoice. Well, Antiochus comes back to Jerusalem. Here it's described as the glorious land, and he finds all the Jews celebrating his death. Now he's mad. What does he do? Well, let's keep reading in verse 30 and 31. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid, and withdraw, and shall turn back, and be enraged, and shall take action against the holy covenant. In other words, he's going against God's covenant people. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. There were in that time many Jews that paid lip service to Judaism, and if it was better for them financially, they would get along well with forces of Antiochus or the Greeks. It's probably who he's referring to. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. So Antiochus profanes the temple. He goes to the Jerusalem temple with a pig, sacrifices a pig on the altar. This is known as the abomination that makes desolation. He outlaws Judaism. He outlaws the observance of Sabbath. If a Jew was found in those days, resting on the Sabbath day, he would kill them. He, I believe as well, outlawed circumcision. Why? All the distinctive marks of Judaism, temple, circumcision, Torah as well. You get caught with Torah, you die. All the distinctive elements that would identify a Jew as a Jew, he's going after, he's attacking. Now, I think that is part of the reason why the end-time opponent is fashioned after the character of Antiochus. His attack is not just geopolitical, it's religious. And we'll talk about this when we make the turn at verse 36 and begin to talk about the Antichrist. We're going to talk about the religious nature of the Antichrist attack as well. Was there some good that came out of Antiochus's evil reign? Well, yes. The good was, if God turns up the heat on your life, what happens? If you're a believer, you're going to turn to the Lord. If you're not, you're going to turn away. So this event in history, I think if interpreted properly, could be a good thing. Because many of the Jews that loved God, this made them turn to their God and cling to Him, in a more tight and strong manner. Okay, let's keep reading. Verse 32. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. What does Antiochus want the Jews to do? Turn away from God. Yeah, be godless just like me. And guess what? If you're godless just like me, you are in the club. Welcome to the club. Our world today. Is this not what's happening in our world today? Something like this? Be in the club. How do you be in the club? Well, you basically go against everything of who God is and what He stands for, His law. You go against all those things, and welcome to the club. You are smart. You are liberated. You are free. You're enlightened. You're in the club. It's not a club. This kind of godless activity has been happening ever since the fall in Genesis 3. In Antiochus, it's happening again. All right. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. End of 32. 33. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword, flame, captivity, and plunder. Think about Daniel chapter 3, the fiery furnace. They escaped the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. During these days, believers will face the fire again under Antiochus. Daniel's telling us this. And they won't escape the flame. They will be burned in it. 34. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Sometimes the difficulties that we go through in life, caused by our own sin, are used by God in order to make us stronger believers. And that was happening in Antiochus' days as well. All right. Let's see what slide we're on now. Slide 9. When we hit verse 36, we are now at the very end of your very detailed outline. Verses 36 through 45 describe the end time opponent, also known as the Antichrist or the man of lawlessness. But again, remember when we started tonight, I said you've got to ignore your verse divisions and your chapter divisions. Just pretend that they are not there. Look at verses 36 through 45. All of this is describing the end time opponent. Connect that to chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. What do you see in chapter 12? It's really important that we talk about this before we talk about the end time opponent. 12:2. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. What is Daniel 12:2 describing? The resurrection. This is, in the Old Testament, this is probably the most clear text on the resurrection that we have. There are others. However, this is the most clear. So what I'm telling you is you need to link in your mind the idea that the end time opponent comes in close proximity to what? The final resurrection, which means the coming of Christ. Who destroys the end time opponent? Jesus does, right? At the second coming. What else happens at the second coming when Jesus destroys the end-time opponent? Daniel 12:2, the resurrection of the dead. Let me pause for a bit. Questions on that? Good. All right. No questions. Awesome. Okay, let's start reading in verse 36 then. That's a much bigger deal than, what we just said. But anyway, let's keep reading. Verse 36, and the king shall do as he wills. Notice this is the king. This is a different way of putting it than the rest of chapter 11. The king. This is an evil king. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished. For what is decreed shall be done. Okay, let's pause for a second. The tactics of the Antichrist. This is I'm going to bounce back between slide 11 and slide 10. So slide 11. Let's look at the tactics of the Antichrist as we're reading through it. 1, magnification of self. Yeah, that's kind of small font. Sorry, guys. The Antichrist wants above all things to magnify himself. Think about what's happening in our country, in the church, in the last 100 years. How many churches do you know of that make their programming all about you? It's all about you, really. The sermon is about you. How to balance your checkbook, how to, tie your shoes, how to, whatever. It's kind of like a YouTube deal, How to fix your car. This Sunday, how to fix a V8 engine. Everybody needs that. It'll be uplifting and encouraging all today. Many, I think of the kind of mega church movement have tapped into this, the church growth movement. They've tapped into the marketing scheme that if you'll just make it about the individual, they'll come back. Because everybody wants to talk about themselves. So if you're the preacher, all you have to do is just talk about them. And then they'll leave feeling really puffed up. Wow, that was all about me. I'm just thrilled. I can't wait till next week. More about me. I mean, is that not American culture? Think about marketing. Is that not American marketing? Yeah. Well, where does this stuff come from? I don't think it comes from the clever minds of marketing agencies. A good marketing agency knows the fallen nature of man. And they work on that, man is selfish, man is greedy, great. Sex sells, great. That's... Anyway, the Antichrist will magnify himself. That is his chief agenda. And I would say the spirit of the Antichrist is already and not yet. Look at the age that we live in. That is among us. That spirit is here. Let's keep reading. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. There's a tricky phrase in verse 37. It's a phrase that the ESV translates like this. He shall pay no attention, and then there's a series, to the gods of his fathers, or we could say, and, to the one beloved or desired by women, or desired of women. What is this talking about? I'm going to translate it like this on your slide. This particular figure will pay no attention to women. There's about 3 options for understanding this. all of which could be true. One is, if you look throughout history and you look at the tyrants of history, look at the way that these men treat women. When I preach on this, I'm going to give an example. I only have 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to tell you what that example is tonight. You'll have to wait until I preach on it. But even those that have said, yeah, you got to come back, sorry. Even those that have said, I'm the liberator of the little man. You know, I'll kind of whet your appetite. I'm going to tell you about Karl Marx and the way that he treated women when I preach on this. And you're going to go, what? He did that? Yeah, he did. The one that looks out for the little guy could really care less about the little guy. History is filled with this. So one would be to treat women shamelessly. The other way of understanding this would be to deny the basic makeup of humanity as male and female. And I ask you, what do we see today? Yeah, the transgender sexual revolution. I'm not really a man or a woman, you know. I'm non-binary. No, you're not non-binary. You're really confused by your own sin. That's what you are. Anyway, last way to say it would be incapable of a loving relationship. Have you ever met a person that was so into themselves that they couldn't think about anybody else? I've met several preachers that were at very large churches, and I met them. I met their spouse, and thinking of one conversation in particular, this preacher, his wife is right there with him, and he's talking nonstop, and it's all about what he's done. Look at this big church, you know, you want to see my office? I've got blah, 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 blah. His wife's right there, just quiet the whole time. And he was a workaholic. He worked like from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and all type A personality people would say, yeah, you know, he's a hard worker. Yeah, but he never went home to see his wife and kids, hardly. Why did he have a relationship like that? Well, I think it was because he was so focused on himself that he couldn't really love anybody else, even his own wife. So that spirit is among us as well in this age. Let's keep going, verse 38. He shall honor the gods of fortresses instead of these. What is meant by the god of fortresses? Probably power. What is the Antichrist's chief goal? Well, to glorify himself. Friends, what is the center point of the Bible? If you had to boil the Bible down to a bullseye, what is it all about? It's about the glorification of the one true God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's what the Bible's about. What is the Antichrist about? The glorification of himself. So what does he love? Power. That's right. That's right. And this power is going to come within a context as well. Keep on reading. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. In other words, do you see idolatry in that? Religion is his business. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and shall divide the land for a price. Do you ever feel like the only ones that make it into political positions of power are the ungodly today? You ever feel like that? Well, it's been like that in human history a lot of the time. Verse 40 now through 45. And I'm going to read this rather quickly. We'll be on footnote 12 when we get to after we finish reading this. At that time, or at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and shall overflow and pass through. So notice we're getting king of the north, king of the south language again. I think what Daniel's doing is he is painting a picture of the Antichrist figure using the imagery of the most notorious king of the north. Who was that? Antiochus. So he's using the imagery of Antiochus in order to flesh out more fully what this Antichrist figure looks like. 41, he shall come into the glorious land, a.k.a. another term for Israel. The question here is the glorious land here referring to a place in the Middle East? Or is the glorious land here referring to a people, a believing community? Now, some would say, well, time out. You've already interpreted glorious land throughout the rest of chapter 11 as relating to Israel. And historically, we know that's true because there were battles that took place. And, Antiochus comes home to the glorious land and he, decimates the Jews. So why is it that you can even begin to think that there might be another way of interpreting glorious land in verse 41? We'll keep reading, and I'll tell you why I would hold that. In other words, I don't think he's talking about Israel here. I think what he's talking about is Antichrist coming into the community of faith in order to wreak havoc on the community of faith. Now let's continue to read. And tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. Whoa, time out. We're talking about the Antichrist here, right? And now we're mentioning the kingdoms of Edom, Moab, and the Ammonites. Do you see anything that might jump out at you? Any students of biblical history? Yes, they're all pagans. Laurel is correct. These are all the enemies, the ancient enemies of God's people. The question is, though, by even the days of Antiochus, is Moab, Ammon, or Edom still a nation during the days of Antiochus? The answer is no. They're gone. And they've been gone for quite some time. In fact, Moab is destroyed in 733 BC by the hand of the Assyrians. So here's the question. Why does he bring up these nations, Moab, Ammon, Edom, at this point? Well, I think he's bringing them up, as Laurel has already mentioned, they are the epitome of the enemies of the Israelites in the Old Testament. In other words, he's using them for their metaphorical value. Okay, he shall stretch out his hand against the countries of the land of Egypt, shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasuries of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. Okay, Egypt, Libyans, Cushites. Again, what's the common denominator with these folks? Old Testament theology style. The enemies of God's people. Again. (44) But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and to devote many to destruction. What Daniel is describing is the end-time enemy coming to do a great war, gathering for war. We've seen other pictures of this in the Bible. The ending of the book of Ezekiel describes a picture similar to this. Revelation 19 describes the same picture, I would argue, where the kings of the earth, they gather together for war. And what is told about that event? Well, I believe it's an angel tells the birds that eat dead things, the vultures, gather together. This isn't a battle. This is going to be a dinner. In other words, an all-you-can-eat buffet for carrion. Because God's going to slay his enemies, wipe them all out. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet shall come to his end with none to help him. Daniel is describing the end-time opponent building up his forces against God with all of his intrigue, going against the people of God here, holy land, holy mountain, glorious land, I would argue, is probably an attempt to say he's going to try to make his way into the people of God and destroy the people of God from the inside out. However, he quickly comes to his end. End of chapter 11. Okay, let me pause for just a bit. We can we can do all of 12 next week if you want and stop here. I want you guys to keep in mind that this is blocked together thematically. The kind of entry of the end-time opponent, the defeat of the end-time opponent, the resurrection, and final judgment, package deal. Don't separate that in your minds. If you separate it, I think you're introducing an unnatural division in Daniel that is not there. Okay, now we'll pause. I'm out of time for tonight. Any questions? Last minute. Good. More than likely when I preach on it, I'm not going to preach for an hour. I know that 90% will endure 30 minutes and no more. So I might pass that sheet out again. You guys might see it again, but give it to the whole church. That way they can work their way through Daniel 11 and not be drowned in all the details of it. So any other comments before we close? Yep. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Come to. Yeah. A lot of those that call themselves Christians, their God is all about them, and consumer Christianity at its finest. God is not about us. He graciously and mercifully saves us, but that plan is not about us. It's about Him. It's about His glory. So, you wouldn't want all of eternity to be about you, would you? I mean, imagine how boring that would be. Okay, let's pray. Yes. Oh, yeah. We're going to have some parking lot maintenance done tomorrow. Cracks are going to be filled. Stripes are going to be striped.